recording.
Okay.
Yeah. So we want to know more about your like problems in general.
Okay.
Think of idea, because I feel like we were talking to many graduate students as well, and they actually feel like there's not enough promotion for them, and I wonder whether graduate students are like a focus for IDA, or IDA is some way like interested in attracting more undergrad.
Oh, well, I mean, so Ideate is primarily an undergraduate program.
Yeah.
So we do, part of that is we sort of base all of our structures around the undergraduate minors.
Yeah.
And those are exclusively undergraduate programs. So as far as like, the graduate program aspect is complex because there is sort of like the departments very much own the graduate programs that they provide, and so the dynamics between like how graduate students move through the university community and how undergraduate students move through the community can vary wildly from department to department. So it's some departments very much like the graduate students stay very much just within the curricular and even the physical space that they inhabit in terms of their graduate program, whereas others move a little bit more freely throughout the university. So I think it is the case that graduate student experience is not like a main focus of Ideate, and it's not due to any kind of like malice. It's just the fact that we know how to service the undergraduate population because those students are a little bit more of the university than graduate students. So the needs of graduate programs, are a little bit harder to pin down and to service from a little bit more of a central perspective. Okay. Yeah.
But IDEA still welcomes graduate students?
Yeah, I mean they're welcome to take the classes, and we don't necessarily we don't have any say on like graduate curriculum, so we wouldn't be able to say like what if the classes count toward your graduate program, and because we are sort of focused on serving the undergraduate population, we do tend to sort of like, if there's a 200 level class that we offer and there's graduate students who are interested in it, we do sort of have the caveat like, well, if there's space available, we can put you in it, but it's a 200 level class. It should be mostly populated by freshmen and sophomore, and the dynamics of having like freshmen up to PhD students can be sometimes too much of a challenge for the professor. So there's a lot of complexities involved, and it's not because I think that's more of the because we have not prioritized graduate education is more of there's a lot of ways to do that wrong, and so we want to sort of like focus on what we can do correctly by the undergraduate population. And if at some point we evolve to sort of like service a wider part of the population, great. Yeah.
And do you want to answer that?
All right, because like we have consulted with Marty today, and she recommended us to like focus on our topic to documentation part, right? And I'm wondering that because you said that there's an event in spring that students can like showcase their things, all of this stuff, and have we ever thought of like asking or let students to collect all their work in class and keep it in their maybe on platform or school platforms, and to help them to showcase their things or help them to do the documentation part?
No. So we, for the Meeting of the Minds showcase, those tend to be things that are usually the culminating or final projects for the course. And just because of the length of time that we have available to us, we don't try to do like, here's what the class has done the whole semester. Hopefully there's some way to sort of like encapsulate that through their final project. It's sort of like but we don't necessarily demand that they bring a lot of documentation just because it's a big event, and I don't know that the participants would actually be able to sort of like review that. It just wouldn't be like the best forum for that kind of practice.
Mm-hmm. But do we have any other projects, not only in these classes, but other projects that students can do in Ideate? Because I have seen like some of their work are really like impressive, but it seems that like do they have like longer project in Ideate? Not courses, but something like research or other things?
So we don't have a research project set up. We are trying to figure out a way to do a capstone experience. It's tough though because and I think we're hoping to. There's a game design class that's happening next semester that we think has maybe some of the seeds of starting into like a capstone project. It's not going to be officially known as a capstone project, but we're asking the professor to actually sort of think about, what works and what doesn't for this type of experience. It would be tough to do because the other thing is that, Ideate tries to put a focus on collaboration. So we could very easily do like a capstone project that is for students as individuals, but we haven't figured out a way to do it as like a group project. So we might, it might be the case that we end up doing like, there's an animation capstone class, there's a physical computing capstone class. There might be like a capstone project for each individual area. But that you also sort of like run the risk of, because of everyone's different schedules, you might end up with a capstone course that has 2 computer scientists and no artists in it, or some like, so it's hard to kind of know how to best execute that. I know that the humanities college is also trying to figure out a way to do like interdisciplinary capstone experiences. So it's something that we would like to do, but the actual mechanics of it are a little more than overwhelming. So we're kind of not really sure where to start with that. So we're hoping to find out what the professor who's doing the game design class in the spring, what he's able to kind of take away from that. And also, we want to make it something that is accessible to everybody, which is like also another knock against it, because we have usually somewhere in the neighborhood of like 50 to 60 students graduating with Ideate minors every year. I could see it being close to impossible to have a capstone experience for all of those students, so right away we would not make it a requirement, but that sort of puts us in this sort of like paradox where if it's not required, we don't know if anybody will take it.
Right.
So, and we don't want to, part of the reason why we don't want to make a requirement is because the minor is so few classes as it is. It's typically about 5 classes. I could see students wanting to not take up one of those classes with a capstone experience. So the thing that we would need to figure out is like, how do we get the capstone to count for some other requirement, like whether it's like a general education requirement or, how do we actually, administer this kind of experience? So there's a lot to consider, and it's something that, I think we're kind of slowly picking away at it, but we're not prioritizing because we do also need to sort of like, further refine the curriculum we have as it is. So the capstone is sort of a low priority.
Also, I wanna step back to a bigger picture. I feel like we never asked you about like what is your vision of IDA? Because I asked a lot of students and they said a lot of different answers. So some people say, oh, it sounds like a CMU version of Media Lab, or
that's fair. Yeah, so there's. We don't have any shame about our aspirations for some aspects of MIT operations, not all of them. And I think that's sort of like I don't think CMU as a whole would be unabashed to sort of say we do look to MIT, MIT has a lot of aspirational components for CMU in general. As far as Ideate and its origins, there were actually a lot of the not a lot, but there were a number of key people in the development of Ideate who were from the MIT Media Lab. So it is not accidental that some of that DNA sort of seems present in Ideate. So I think my personal, like, what I would really like to see happen is that it becomes something that every student participates in at least once. So even if they take like just one class with us, you know, I think that would be something. One of the common refrains that I hear from ID students as they're graduating, usually at the end of the year, I ask them for, like, you know, what are your reflections on it, and good and bad. So, like, you know, like, what, you know, if there was some, like, kind of, I wish some of the classes were longer, or there were more units, or something like that. But, you know, the positive side that they have of it is that it becomes this kind of, like, sort of key defining experience for them at CMU. And not because it's ID, but because it's sort of, like, it just sort of serves as sort of a wheelhouse for the different types of things different types of people that you encounter at CMU. So I would like it to be sort of this kind of common experience that all students get to have, and one that is generally positive, or is a way for them to sort of figure out, like, why did I want to be a student here, as opposed to somewhere else. So that would be the common experience that I would really like to see, and that would be a really transformative thing for both the program itself and the university. That would require more physical space, that would require more classes, that would require more people. So that would be, like, you know, probably at least 10 years down the road, you know, if we were actively working toward that. But I would like to see, you know, sort of every student get the chance to sort of think about, you know, why they wanted to be a student here, and have IDA be, like, one of the methods that they have of answering that question for them.
That's what, because there are lots of really diverse classes. I noticed, like, even III has a class listed. That one is actually like a capstone project.
It is with, like, a little bit more integrated product conceptualization. So it does have sort of some capstone components to it.
And from, like, this and like, there's another, like, I think transition design is also like an IDA class as well. So I just feel like IDA is trying to include everything, but
so we have to be careful about that, because there's, you know, because we want to make sure that the departments feel that they have some autonomy and identity outside of the larger CMU picture, which is very important to the culture here. So, you know, there's a lot of, we have to be careful to not, you know, consume everything as we go along in some sort of, like, nightmarish Katamari, you know, academic environment. So, you know, the key delineation that we have now is that, you know, for, say, the School of Design, there are some School of Design classes that are only design classes. There's only design students in them. That's great. That is not, like, a problem. That's not something that we want to try to fix. The thing that we do want to try to help with is that when it is time for students from the School of Design or computer science or business to sort of, like, go out and learn with each other in a way that is collaborative, how can we help do that? And sometimes it's just kind of like, you know, we can have a piece of equipment over in the IDA lab that your class needs occasionally, and so we can just have it available and your students can come use it whenever they want to. But it might be something a little bit more broader in scope where, you know, there is an actual faculty that doesn't exist yet that we need to help hire. And so we've done that a number of times with departments. So there's, you know, they need a faculty member who is skilled in animation, skilled in game design, skilled in physical computing. So these are some of the, like, the larger transformative things that we do, while still allowing the department to sort of say, like, you know, and we still have, like, our stable faculty who are teaching, you know, core computer science faculty or core computer science curriculum or design or arts or drama. So
So these courses are, like, in the Envision part, or start to do this right now? I mean, combine the school students in School of Design with maybe students from other departments.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, you know, design students have always and continue to take IDA classes, and they're taking them with students from outside of design. So that's, you know, that's something that we're very encouraged to see, because, you know, from our perspective, it is absolutely essential that, you know, design is such a huge part of CMU in general, so
Right.
like, it would be just a shame if, any student did not get a chance to like, work with a designer at any point, during their time here. But we would be able to say that about any of the disciplines here. So, that's why the curriculum is sort of structured to make sure that like, make sure you're taking a computer science class, because, computer science is a huge part of the culture here, and so you do need to sort of understand, how do the sort of fundamentals of computer science sort of filter their way into arts, into humanities, into science. So, the key is really kind of like trying to remove any kind of traffic jams that we can, so that students have as many opportunities as possible to work with each other. So sometimes that's just like including a course that's already underway in the list of IDA courses, but sometimes that's creating a whole new course that helps to round out the rest of the curriculum for an area that we're working on. So,
Got it.
Like, do students ever ask you about like what the outcomes of the class would be or something, or do they
when they're
ever-
considering taking
Yeah.
a class, what
Yeah.
would the outcomes be?
Do they wonder?
Is there an advisor to offer some suggestions for students' course selection?
Right, I'm gonna ask those questions.
So, sorry, let's
Oh, it's
let's
okay.
go back
Yeah.
to your question for a second. So, so students, do they ask what the outcomes will be?
Yeah.
They don't ask me directly, not that I can think of. I would hope that they're able to sort of get a sense of the class from things like the course profile in S3, so that is something
Yeah.
like a mechanism that I hope that they're able to get to that. I think sometimes if students want to know deeper information about like what is sort of like the meta curriculum that we're going to be absorbing, I usually try to put them in touch with the instructor directly, so that they can actually discuss that one-on-one.
Okay.
Yeah.
But other than that, they can only go to the Meeting the Minds event to see the like your showcasing of the work.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like the outcomes, like the physical artifacts from a class, they'll be different every time, just based on like the makeup of the class. Like hopefully the ideas that the students are bringing semester to semester are different.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I mean the differing ingredient is the students who are taking the class, and so they will change the dynamic of the class every time it happens. But the overarching like educational goals, those remain the same. And if the student is concerned about like what skills will I actually gain, like what will my experience be, that's sort of a better conversation for them to have with a professor.
Yeah.
But hopefully they're able to sort of like get a good sense of it while they're researching for their schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when we were talking to some students undergrad, they said one big challenge, like coming to IDA class, was you have to learn new things in every class. So if they have like I don't know whether it's gonna be a good thing or not if they have a better preparation.
Better preparation for like what they'll actually be learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know whether that's we can ask them
Okay.
again.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether you know anything about it. Like.
I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily been brought to my
Okay.
attention. That might be something that's communicated a little bit more through the faculty feedback.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Your question?
My question actually is the same with you.
Oh, okay.
And another question is like, do you think for now the students in IDA is diverse enough? Is there any patterns that we have
More
student-
some kind of students.
Yeah,
than
like
the
mechanical
other.
engineering.
So we don't have a ton of students from Tepper participating. And then, so it would be really great. And they tend to gravitate toward the innovation and entrepreneurship area, which is fine.
Yeah.
But I would love to see them in some of like the other areas as well. And then we also we tend to, as far as like the humanities students, we get a large concentration of them from like information systems. So it would be great to see from students from some of the other humanities areas in all the IDEA areas as well. So Tepper and Dietrich are the two that I would really like to pull in more.
Dietrich, that's the engineering.
That's humanities.
Humanities.
Yeah. Yeah, so it'd be great to see like more philosophers, more data scientists, more economists.
Because I feel like probably like Tepper students, they have like a pretty specific goal in what they want.
Yeah. So that's like sort of similar to, and I always, when I'm talking to students, if they're coming from outside of business, I always recommend that they take a business class and like take one.
Yeah.
It can be like global business or anything like that, but like, it's, and this is true for like everything here, but like business is not something that you're going to like be able to opt out of.
Mm-hmm.
Like it affects you, like, it's sort of like it drives sort of like every single aspect of that of daily life that you'll be interacting with, whether you are interested in business or not, so it's good just to have like a good understanding of it, and the classes are really, really interesting just from like just from an outsider's perspective. And similarly, like I think that the students who are business majors are I think they get a little bit forgetful about like what kind of perspectives they can contribute to. So they sort of think like, well, I'm business, so I should, surround myself in business context. And it's like, well, sure, but like, you could also take, a fabrication class with us and sort of think about like, what if I'm like maybe thinking about, understanding, creative industries or understanding, startup industries. This can only help you. So, like these are the people that you'll also be interacting with from a business perspective, like, similar to, we don't get to exempt ourselves from business, but we also don't get to exempt ourselves from, social concerns or from creativity or from design thinking. So having like a sort of like a broader understanding of, if you think of like university as sort of a microcosm of the world, it's, the stakes are low enough on purpose so that you do actually get to sort of like see everything that you might be encountering once you leave the sort of like petri dish of the university, and sort of like get an understanding of, what are some challenges that you'll face if you're a business person or if you're an artist or if you're a humanist or if you're a scientist. So that's kind of the bigger goal of IDA is just sort of like, here's sort of like a central meeting space, and you guys can sort of, connect with each other in these sort of serendipitous ways that will be, hopefully very meaningful for you. So yeah, I mean, just kind of, and seeing people sort of land in some places that they thought weren't very likely for them will be a really great outcome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just to educate like more wholesome people.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I'm kind of wondering that how IDA right now are like trying to attract students.
How do we try to attract students?
Right. Now, I mean.
So, one of the things that we've done, and we need to sort of like refresh it a little bit, is that we've reached out to colleges that oversee general education curriculum. So we've done this with Dietrich, we've done this with engineering, and then, so to some degree with our sort of a curriculum that is to be had in College of Fine Arts and Tepper and CS, just sort of like making the IDA classes options in that pack of the curriculum. So at the very least, if a student is interested in taking an IDA course, it's not something that they're doing just arbitrarily and maybe is taking up a chunk of time that they should have been devoting to something else. We know that students have a lot to accomplish in 4 or 5 years here, so we try not to be an extra time commitment to them as much as we can. So I think probably that's one of the mechanical things that we've done to try to like attract students to it. Whether or not that's been successful or not, I don't know, but it's worthwhile enough to just sort of like have those be out there as options for students. We also, whenever a department is holding an info session for their students to let them know about like what can they do outside of their home department, we always say yes to those. We always go to those, let students know that they can take classes, they can do a minor with us. We let them know about using the IDA facility and how they can go about doing that. If it's if that's all that they're interested in, like I don't really want to take the classes, but I do want to be able to use the facilities. Okay, well here's how you can go about doing that. So beyond that, I think we just try to be as visible as possible. And I know that there's probably multiple opportunities that we're just like not grasping onto or thinking of currently. But now that we've been around for a few years, typically admissions tries to do a good job of making students aware of it, like when they're going through application process and definitely during orientation. So students are at least aware of it. You know, for the first year or two when we were around, we had like a number of students who were on their way out and like only finding out about ID8, you know, their last semester and feeling kind of sad about it because it's something that they would have really liked to participate in, which is, you know, kind of unavoidable. But you know, I think that we try to have a presence in any kind of like larger community events, so like family weekend, orientation, meeting of the minds, you know, is a way that a lot of people get at least a chance to sort of like see what we're doing. Anytime there's kinds of like larger events, a carnival, we usually have some kind of presence at carnival somehow, whether it's, you know, just something, stickers or something, but yeah, like we try to sort of make sure that people know that we're a part of it too, so yeah.
And social media?
Yeah. So we have a Facebook, we have a Twitter, we have an Instagram. They're mostly used as tools of communication more than like active promotion, and that's mostly due to the fact that you know we don't have a dedicated you know, social media or communications professional. It's me. So I mean, luckily that's my background, so it's something that I enjoy doing, but I wish that I had a lot more time to spend on it. You know, I do try to sort of like every once in a while, if something interesting is happening, I'll try to take a picture of it for Instagram so that without being intrusive in a class, you know, like it's sort of important that the classroom be kind of sacred and, you know, people get to learn on their own and not have to worry about like how it's being perceived by an outside audience. But, you know, if there's ways for me to sort of like just catch a glimpse of something for Instagram or something like that, I try to do that every once in a while, a couple times a semester at least.
Right. Okay. So we're actually trying to like document something to help us to promote social media stuff. Yeah, it's the thing that we're trying to do, because we have like seen some students in IDA, their portfolios. We're seeing their portfolios, and I think the work's really impressive. And I'm wondering that do students would like, are there any like feedback from students that they want to upload their work onto the website, maybe the official website, and to
I've not heard that. That would be really interesting. I mean, it would be probably best to do that in like a few isolated you know, test cases, like maybe like we select, you know, one student from each area for a year to sort of like give us kind of like an ongoing you know, check in terms of like, here's what I've been doing this semester and here's what I'm working on, or I'm not taking any ID classes this semester, but here's like sort of like things that I'm doing in the background that are kind of ID8 related. So those would be like, you know, really interested. I know that the when we've had student feedback before, you know, one of the common themes is like we would just like to know what the other students are doing, and so we try to, you know, in some ways we try to help make that happen, but there's sort of like limits to what we can or should do, you know. So a lot of times there will be you know, suggestions for you know, could we have cameras set up in the ID8 labs? And it's like, well, no. I mean, that's like, that gets into a really weird area in terms of privacy. And
right.
So, like, you know, like I know it sounds fun, but like, you know, then we get into like just weird areas. So we do have like our Friday 8 events, and so we do try to like, you know, get students together once a month, and those have a nice like core you know, group of attendees, and it would be nice to see like more students just drop in and just sort of see who's down there and who's around, and you know, I think that having even something like a common hashtag, you know, that if students were sort of like posting work about theirs on their Instagram or something, you know, sort of like something that you commonly like just tap on to see like, oh, so-and-so, I didn't know they were doing games with ID8, so I'm going to reach out to them, and, you know, that kind of thing. So those are things that we could kind of like put in motion, but we wouldn't necessarily, it would be intrusive of us to try to like orchestrate, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Oh, so I'm not really getting to understand the Friday thing. I mean, each month, like there is one Friday in each month that will like students taking the ID courses will get it together and to share their work or
So they don't have to share
For
work. I mean, it's more just like a social, casual get together.
just a social thing?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right.
So that was something that, like, you know, at various points when we've gotten feedback from students, they wanted more opportunities to connect with each other. So we have once a month we have Friday 8, and so we just have some food. Sometimes there will be like a structured, you know, activity that we're doing. Most of the time it's just stop down, get some food, see each other, say hi to each other.
Oh,
So.
okay, got it.
So, like, if we want to showcase like other people's work on the website, you're concerned of the privacy, like kind of.
Well, so privacy. I mean, like, obviously, like that would, you know, I'm assuming that anybody who's showing their work would have, you know, an understanding of what it means to publish your work on the web. One of the, you know, it's one of the frustrating things about like the gallery sort of kind of like being in fits and starts is that it does have terms and conditions that have been like have been signed off by the university attorney, so they are compliant with any type of like intellectual property that is governing over the students. So we would need to kind of like, you know, have some informed participation so that like students knew, you know, if I'm, you know, sharing my work via the main Ideate site, this is what that means. And if at some point I want it to be taken down, how do I actually do that? And so just having sort of like a firm set of parameters that, you know, we could, you know, engage with that would be great. But especially with somebody's intellectual property, you know, you have to be really careful about like making sure that they're aware of your rights, that you're aware of your responsibilities, that they're aware of their responsibilities. Yeah, so it's a big, it's bigger than it
Right.
seems. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
So it's harder to show other people, probably.
Right,
Yeah,
but what
so,
if they
and we
want-
know that like, you know, courses have, you know, instructors will set up like WordPress sites and things like that, you know, and it's sort of like a common practice to have, you know, a publicly accessible site that, you know, has student work on it, and then which gets into a gray area in terms of if you're making a requirement for the class that all students upload their work to your WordPress site, but the WordPress site is not secure, you know, who is then responsible for like that student's data then being like out in the world? So, you know, so that's why we try to like push things that are, you know, I know that not everybody likes to use things like Canvas, but Canvas is protected. So, you know, it's not the case that somebody would then be able to just go and grab somebody's project from, you know, Professor Joe's unsecured WordPress site and then like, you know, use it as their own. So, yeah, I mean, I think like, you know, if we were going to put anything up on the website, on the main Ideate site, you know, we would have sort of, I think I would be more comfortable with have that being a limited engagement. So, you know, saying like for this year, we're going to showcase these projects, and then, you know, next semester we're going to rotate them, and the old ones are going to be taken down. So it wouldn't be like a living, you know, it wouldn't be something. It wouldn't be an archive just because, you know, I think that for both parties, it's fair to sort of say, you know, you should be able to move on from this as an individual, and absolutely like, you know, put it on your resume or whatever you want, you know, sort of, you know, print the pages or take screen caps while they're live and put them in your portfolio. But being able to sort of say like, you know, this doesn't have to be something that stays with you forever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
Still possible though.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just figuring out like how to do it is, you know, yeah.
Right, and I can hear that like IDEA is trying to like cooperate students together. They're trying to like students really interact together. And I'm wondering that are there any problems in the process? I mean, you're trying to like hold an event each month, and what are other things that can interfere with that? I mean, there must be some problems that students encounter in their interactions when they collaborate with each other.
Like, does the Friday 8 sort of
not only Friday event, but all this stuff when students are like interactive with each other. Are there any like general problems of them?
I don't think there's anything fatal. I mean, I think there's sometimes, you know, and nothing that you don't encounter in collaborative settings, regardless. So, like, if you've had, you know, a group project in a class that you were only taking with other students from your major,
Mm-hmm.
there's always like somebody who doesn't, fully engage or fully participate. Like those kinds of dynamics are just human dynamics. So there's
All right.
we can't solve that. Like
Right.
IDH scope is definitely like, far away from that. But sometimes there will be, sort of interesting issues where, it's sort of common practice for CS students generally, if they're in a CS class, like all of their assignments are due Tuesday at midnight.
Oh,
And so like
that's time
sometimes you
management.
have, and then sometimes there's just like, students from some of the arts and humanities majors, like a lot of their stuff is due like the last week of classes and so like that's their crunch time. But other colleges, they have final exams, so like that final exam period is when they're like really crunched, and so you have sort of traffic jams in terms of like the different ways that colleges and departments just sort of like go about their lives. So those, and I don't know that we would really ever try to tackle that. I think that's just sort of like a
Smart part.
I mean, it's just like that's and that's like there's probably not a solution that is worth going after, and it would be something that would have to that everyone would have to agree to, and I just don't ever see that happening. And there's probably a lot of really really good reasons why something like that would never is not a good idea. So I think in terms of the actual collaboration, I know that there's always like, especially at the beginning of the semester, some growing pains in terms of figuring out, do we have, we need somebody to do narrative, and there's no writers taking the class and stuff like that. So like, there's something that you want, but that aspect just didn't actually come through this time around. But that's also part of the learning experience. Like, you will not always have the exact right set of conditions for, either your learning or your professional experience. Like, you're probably always going to be missing something. And it's probably going to be something really big that you really, really needed. And now you have to, like, completely rethink how you're going to go about doing, like, a learning or professional project. That just always happens. So it's like, it's fine to kind of, like, have that experience here, where like the worst thing that happens is like maybe you don't get as high of a grade as you thought you were going to, or the project doesn't turn out how you, and not like your company then loses $2 million or something like that, you know what I mean, like, and people have to be let go or something like that. So so having those kinds of experiences here where it's just more of like a broad laboratory experiment, that everybody has sort of like decided that we're all going to be in the same place doing it at the same time, is one of the ways that you can kind of like go through those emotional experiences where like I had a really good idea and it just never came together the way I thought it was going to, and going through that mourning process of like I had a great idea and it just wasn't meant to be, and so
Okay, got it. Okay, so
I think
is one of our teammates, she's from IDEA. She told us that you will send IDEA students newsletter.
Yeah.
Is that possible for us to insert a survey about documentation?
Yes.
Oh yeah, so we can send you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
that's nice.
Yeah, something that so I talked to the faculty about this, but I think they always forget about it, is that so for things like email lists, like you're not supposed to just subscribe people to them, like you're supposed to like have them opt into it. So I ask faculty, like, do you want me to send out a link to your students? And sometimes I hear from them and sometimes I don't. So I can always like send out a link to sign up to it, to students who are enrolled in the classes, and if they want to be part of the mailing list, they can, and if they don't want to, they don't have to. But yeah, like, so, and that's usually, sometimes the stuff that goes into that is IDEA specific, like, IDEA is having a get-together, or having, some event in the media lab or something, and sometimes it's things that are happening elsewhere in the university that are interesting, that, I think people who are, participating in IDEA should know about. But I'm happy to share information through that channel, and I also keep, like on the IDEA site under about IDEA, there's like a news and announcements, like all of everything that I send out via the newsletter, I copy onto like the news and announcement page too. So like there's sort of like ongoing, yeah.
All right. I have another question about maybe the privacy data, because like if the instructors are using WordPress, it's likely for them to of the data to be stolen by others on the internet.
So it could
Right,
be, yeah.
it could
So IDA
Right.
does, through our course preparations, we do have WordPress instances that we're happy to generate for faculty. So if they want to have sort of like a central spot for their class and they don't want to use Canvas, we try to provide some incentive that we can do a WordPress site that is not publicly viewable. It's something that you have to do your authentication through CMU to do so that it is properly protected and secure. That does not stop people from just generating Professor Lowe's fall 2019 class.org class. That can, there's probably some binding regulation against that, but that doesn't stop it from happening. That is something that we try to incentivize away from that by saying we'll set it up for you, we'll get it ready, but we can't necessarily
stop it.
Yeah. And so, and if say 5 years from now a student, says I don't want my work on this site anymore, it becomes kind of tough for the university to be able to do anything on either party's behalf.
Right.
Yeah. So we hopefully the faculty know better, but sometimes they don't. So yeah.
Is it a reasonable thing for students not from IDA class but from CMU that all of other students to view the website? They're not anyone on the internet, but only students from CMU can view this work. Would be a problem for privacy?
So if it's a WordPress site that we set up for them?
Right. The WordPress, if the WordPress is only available in the CMU environment. I mean, all the students in
so
CMU
the ones that we set up are usually set up so that you have to be associated with the class somehow. So you have to be registered for the class, you have to be teaching the class, or you're a TA for the class. So we're able to sort of provide some kind of protection for it.
What if they're just students who don't register the class, but they want to see the class, but they are CMU students? If they can access to the website, is there any problem on privacy?
I don't know. But it's to an area that I'm not totally versed on. But yeah.
Right, it's like a gray space.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we have.
But one of our goals for IDA that in our last interview, the second and the third goal for IDA, I mean the further version or envision of IDA is to maybe parents or students from other classes to see their work and to see what they're doing and their outcomes stuff.
Yeah, and I think probably a more curated approach to that would probably be preferable for everybody involved. So something that was separate from a course website. So instead of having everything be available, what are sort of what are some key projects that, and this is something that students could offer up. So I was really proud of this, and have some kind of making sure it's appropriate for all audiences and stuff like that. But sort of saying I was really proud of this, and I would really like to share it with current students, prospective students, parents, my parents, your parents, everybody, and having that be so having some kind of terms where we would say you'd like to display this on the IDA website for a period of 1 year, and after 1 year, either doing some I'd like to continue showing it, or I'd like to be taken down after a year, or some kind of structure like that, so that we don't have just sort of this ongoing rambling collection of artifacts and projects and things like that 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 kind of thing. Something that I'm working on. This was actually something that Marty had suggested that we do, and this was primarily for the Design for Learning students because there's only about a dozen students doing that minor. So she had wanted to have sort of a directory, and it was something that she asked the students if they'd be interested in doing, and they said yes. So I actually collected biographical information from those students and made clear time and again this is absolutely voluntary. You do not have to participate in this, but there is going to slowly be building a student directory page on the website somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be the case, and I'm going to send it out to the students who are in the other Ideate minors to say, like, if you'd like to, like, have your information on the Ideate site, you need your name, need your major, and and that kind of thing. And it might be a way to sort of like, what is an Ideate project that you're proud of? Put a picture and some information, some documentation of it in the space below. And that might be a way that we go about doing that. And that's, like a way that we could fairly easily, just sort of do like annual check-ins with people and say like, hey, this is your listing on the Ideate site. If you are not as proud of this project as you once were and you want to like change it, or you want to take it down altogether, or, just sort of change the information, we could do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like a alumni or current student.
Yeah, so it could be current students, and then when they graduate, they could switch over to like an alumni listing. Yeah.
Yeah, I have another idea that do we have like student sharing platform right now?
Student sharing platform?
Yeah, because we're like holding some events to help students collaborate with each other, and we have maybe this spring events and help students to collaborate. But and students are like studying in projects, so they have to like collaborate with each other. But maybe there are like several groups in one class, and there are so many classes. So is there any platform for students to share their things on that platform for all the Ideate students? I mean, for all Ideate students to communicate?
No. I mean, like...
Is it useful?
So that would be great. I mean, I don't know. There's one of those things where it kind of has to be a student-initiated space.
Right.
So there is a Facebook group that a couple enthusiastic students started a couple years ago, and then they graduated, and then
it's done.
Yeah, and it's just like nothing's happened with it since, which is fine. These things happen, and that's part of that is like, since I am not a student, I don't know what is the best way for people to communicate with each other, across different platforms. Yeah. So no, as far as I know, there is not sort of like a central sharing platform that all the students use. It'd be great if that existed, but it's sort of, upon the students to kind of like get that up and going, because that's one of the things that just seems to have to happen organically, and it can't necessarily be like me saying like, share with each other now. It's just sort of like,
I feel like there are already a lot of existing tools. So it's kind of burden.
Yeah, I mean, like, do those, in your experience as students, like, do you have, like, a communication tool that you use within your program, or?
We do have, like, a chatting.
You have a Slack,
Yeah, chatting program. Yeah. But it's just, like, within our class. It's
just within your class?
Yeah, it's not, like, beyond to, like, our alumni.
Yeah, Ideate also had a Slack that got that was actually another Dara Byrne initiative, but I think it was a little bit ahead of its time. I think people weren't totally aware of like what Slack was, and would forget about it quickly. So yeah, like that never really took off as like a channel of communication. So yeah, but maybe maybe it would now. I don't know. Like I said, this was probably like 5 years ago. So like before, I think it was before. If you were not in a profession that used Slack, I don't think there was much of a reason to be aware of it. So as a student communication, like, even students who are coming from tech backgrounds are like, what is Slack? I have not heard of it. So this was like, I think it was just kind of a little bit early for that kind of thing. So yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last question. How do you define the role of documentation in Ideate?
I'm sorry?
That's a good question.
How do you define the role of documentation in Ideate?
How do I define the role?
Of documentation,
I don't know. I mean, so I think for any discipline, it is very important that you keep track of what you've been doing. And I think because different disciplines define documentation differently, it's sort of a good way to just try to find like what are some common characteristics of documentation that anybody could pick up and adopt and understand no matter what discipline you were coming from. So for lack of a better term, it's trying to find a shared language across different disciplinary languages. So like what is sort of like a common practice that we can all agree on that has some common characteristics that maybe is not exactly the same way that you document your work in the arts or you document your work in the sciences, but what is sort of like a common thread that we can find so that we kind of all have an understanding of what this project meant to us, how it worked, and what we took away from it. So just in terms of like a programmatic exercise, I mean, I think it's important to us because it's important to all the disciplines that we interact with. So trying to find the right tool for that is what we're trying to figure out how to do.
Because I feel like is that like the focus on ideate is more about the process of collaboration rather than
so like, you know, ideate is like very focused on like the experience of it. So, you know, that's why we like sort of, you know, mention a lot of times like, you know, here's what the students are getting out of it. And so I don't, you know, hopefully the larger lessons that students are learning in terms of like when I worked with a designer, like here's what I understood, you know, that's what they're taking and they're sort of understanding as individuals, but just sort of like what are the common experiences that, you know, being an ideate, which is sort of like, you know, feeding into the larger understanding of what it is to be like a person who is learning at this particular institution. Like how does that kind of like shape what your experience was? Because, you know, you could easily graduate and the next day have this feeling of like, I don't think I learned anything. And so like just kind of like being able to have something you can refer to and say like, no, like I sat in a room with, you know, 13 different people who had like 5 different majors, and here's how that experience was like a little bit different than like the class that I took with all of my colleagues in this discipline. So like having something you can sort of say like, oh yeah, okay, I remember like kind of like what, you know, like what the big aha moment that I had, like, you know, taking this class or doing this project, or like a thing that I learned how to do that I just could not imagine being able to do at the beginning of the semester. Like I learned that, and now I'm taking that with me, even if it's something that I refer to back to every day. You know, it's something that can sort of think about like, you know, like I am able of like, you know, changing my mind, and I am able of changing my mindset and how I go about learning something. So just sort of like a common like capturing that, you know that you're actively learning every day here, and it's easy to think like once you leave the campus that you're no longer doing it, but it is something you're doing every single day. So kind of having a record of like, okay, so when I just happened to be in a class with a student who was really, really excited about animation, like here's what I sort of understood about movement that I hadn't thought about because I'm a physics major, and it's just like not an appreciation that I had for it before. And sort of like taking that enthusiasm and that spirit into, you know, making learning happen, even if you're not in a formal learning environment, is important,
So like in this thing, is that like, so the outcome is probably not initially important issue compared to the process of learning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So the outcome is probably less important.
Because I mean, I think like one of the things that I run into a lot, you know, especially when we're doing stuff like Media Minds, even students and sometimes their faculty be a little bit anxious about showing work that didn't go that great, or you know is still just not finished. And I, you know, personally, like I'm interested in seeing all of it, the good and the bad, you know, because that you know, the outcome so much, like, you know, if you created something and it was very successful, great, but if you created something in a class and like you're able to tell me like, here's where it went wrong and here's how many times I cried, you know, like that kind of stuff is like, that's also very valuable, because it, you know, it kind of gives you a greater understanding of you know, I'm not the only one screwing up. Other people screw up, and they're successful people. Like, you know, like they screw up all the time, but here's how they got up the next day and started all over again. And so being able to sort of like be a little bit vulnerable with like with what you're proud of and also what you're kind of like, you know, what is still making you tear up because it just went so badly. Like being able to be, you know, witness to that process to a degree that everyone's comfortable with. Like, you know, you wouldn't want just, you know, people screaming and crying. That would be uncomfortable. But, you know, so walking into a room where everyone was like, amazing. Like, this is weird. Yeah, so, but, you know, just being able to sort of see like, oh, you know, you're learning this about yourself, and I understand because I'm learning this about myself as well, like while we're both students here.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
I got it.
Yeah. So, yeah, outcomes are important, but I think the processes are slightly more important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because kind of like reviews from students about the courses.
What's that?
I mean, the students' experience you mentioned are similar to the reviews about the courses from the students.
Are they similar to the reviews of courses, like through FCEs?
No, just like I'll give the feedback to the courses. It's just like it's a little similar, like you got a product and there's a bunch of reviews about it, and
students review from each other, review each other. I mean, there are comments from other students.
Yeah. Little like this.
So when they give feedback about like the actual like the group that they were in.
For the like
they
the
do a
feedback for their courses, just like the reviews that might initiate to the chanting or comments between the students.
I don't know.
It's still hard to understand. 货物的商品的评价，有点像那种。
Oh, is this like if we do this like recording thing or documentation, or we like write our like feelings and other students like comment? Comment to this, maybe this journal or other things that we wrote.
Oh, would that be a useful exercise? I don't know.
Like a review of the course from other students, so they can see whether they want to take it or not.
Yeah, I mean, so there is that through. So the sort of wonky thing that you have to be careful of is that the official review of a course is the FCE, the faculty course evaluation.
Right.
Now that doesn't give you a ton of insight into like individual student experiences. Only certain people are able to view that feedback. That is intentional because if a faculty is on tenure track or up for some other kind of professional review, those have to be protected. So I think that's why there's not been like a more formal channel of like students sharing their experience, because that is like can be professionally a liability for the faculty who's teaching it. So I mean, like there's always been like informal channels of like sharing that kind of information, and that's fine. But having something like reviews of individual courses gets into a weird area in terms of like whether or not that exposes the faculty member to like, you know, some.
It's hard to control.
It can be informal, but cannot be formal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I know that people use that, and you know, sometimes it's a useful tool, and like sometimes that like, you know, hits on a you know, an aspect of the course that is not an institutional concern, like, you know, like this course, we always spent the first 10 minutes talking about the weather, and I hate the weather, and like, you know, just sort of like stuff like that, you know, like so stuff that's not like actually academically important, but that might be, you know, important to you as an individual.
Right.
So that's what that kind of like, you know, those whisper channels are fine. But, you know, the university would have a hard time having any kind of like comment section for courses, because it gets into a weird area for the faculty. Yeah.
Good. So
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
the time.
Sure, no problem. So your project is sort of like focusing less on the gallery.
After our first round interview.
Yeah.
So
So
we're shifting our focus a little bit.
okay.
But we'll still focus on the documentation.
Yeah.
It includes a lot of
Yeah, like what can you
areas.
document? What's useful? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And if we need like assistance for the survey.
Survey.
Yeah.
Did you help with that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, sure, no problem. That was your little raincoat on your.
It's from Disneyland.
Oh, it's huge.
Thank you
you
so
guys.
much.
We might come to bother you again later.
Yeah, no, I enjoy chatting. All right, have a good one. Stay warm.
Yeah,
Right, it's really cold.
Yeah.
I put on my speakers close.
Yeah.
I only had my rain jacket today, and I was really regretting it. I was pretty cranky walking away from the bus.
Today and tomorrow.
Already.
Yeah.
Tomorrow or the day after tomorrow.
Great.
Thank you. Have a good one.